20 years ago, when I graduated from university, I wanted to make an impact on the world. I wanted to make the world a better place. So I decided to focus on business. When I looked around, I saw that it was businesses that were shaping our lives, shaping our world. It was their decisions that were deciding how much natural resources we would use, what people would be paid, how products were designed, what was in our food, how people were treated across the world in their supply chains, how much pollution there would be, how products were priced. All of these decisions seemed absolutely pivotal, and I wanted to shape them. But when I looked at the world of business, what I saw is a picture of crisis. I saw an ecological and social crisis. I saw businesses that were driving deforestation, that were overusing natural resources. I saw businesses that were underpaying workers, trapping hundreds of millions of people in poverty and hunger. I saw businesses creating pollution, designing products that would cause addiction, including social media. I started seeing businesses creating food that would harm us, designing clothes that would generate pollution. I started realizing that business currently was a part of the problem. When I looked at how humanity was doing and looked at how business was at the heart of the economic activity driving this, that we are overshooting this planet's carrying capacity and we were falling short on life's essentials for hundreds of millions, I thought something has to change. So I landed on a question that would shape my life, my career, and a question that would take me on a journey through different ways of transforming business. That question was, what's stopping businesses from being a force for good? My question seemed clear, but at the same time, the answers were not. The solutions were not. And I began that quest by first working on what my gut told me. And my gut told me that businesses and business leaders were part of this society. They were part of this living planet. That businesses are going to see the light, that they will need to see that their future relies on a healthy planet and relies on thriving societies. So I worked on this for a while. I started working in companies and with companies in partnership to help them understand the risks of how ecological, social, human rights issues were impacting them. And I tried to work with them on these solutions. This was an era, cast your eye back to 12, 13 years ago, this was an era where there was some amazing leadership among some corporates. We started seeing leaders like Paul Polman and started seeing Emmanuel Faber, for instance, people that were pushing the envelope, visionaries, looking for practical impact, but transformation at the same time. But what all of this showed me was that they were having their wings clipped. There was a lot of commitment, but the leaders were held back and eventually pushed out of companies. People even started calling this kind of approach more recently woke capitalism. There was a pushback. There was resentment that was building. And through this, I realized something more is needed. Pure, enlightened, well-intended, visionary leadership was not enough. So I asked myself, who holds power? Who can change companies? And I landed on consumers. All of you, all of us. We can vote with our wallet. We can shape what is on the agenda for companies. It felt like the right approach. And at the time, I moved to Oxfam and started working on a huge global campaign to galvanize hundreds of thousands of consumers to use their voice to get the attention of companies to say, hey, I love your brand, but you need to do better. You need to do better on the rights of the workers and farmers in your supply chain. You need to do better by the soil and by the climate and by the water. You need to improve. And we got 700,000 consumers around the world signing petitions, joining a huge range of activities and pressure campaigns that would lead to companies actually making commitments, actually beginning to change their approach overall. But what I learned was that consumer pressure had its limits. That eventually, yes, companies made commitments, the talk was strong, but at the same time, they were being held back. that the big changes were not happening within companies. What I also saw was that when we started off, the workers and the farmers around the world who grow our food, well, they were still poor. They were still underpaid, and they were still stuck. And that there was what we call a say-do gap between what consumers say they want and how they behave. You ask consumers, do you want your brands to do more by people and planet? And essentially what they tell us is yes, but does their money actually flow differently? Do they shop differently as a result? Too often not, and companies started realizing this. So when the pressure was lifted, the commitments were not followed up on. So then I started thinking, okay, consumer pressure, important, but not enough. What else? What else can we do to drive change in companies? So I moved to investor pressure. Investors, yes, this was the answer. Investors are the boss. The shareholders actually can change how companies behave. Shareholders have a vote at the general meeting. They can decide who is on the board and who is off the board. They can completely pivot how companies operate, right? Let's galvanize investors. Surely they will see it's in their interest that companies behave in a way that protects our planet for all of us and makes sure that societies, workers, everybody thrives. So I started working with a range of different civil society organizations and a range of progressive investment networks. And this started to shape into all these letters that investors would sign and say to the companies, hey, we actually hold your shares. We need you to do more on these issues. And we started seeing pension funds and other institutional investors join this, create new alliances, alliances for net zero, alliances on human rights. And this really did get the attention of companies. But what I noticed, that even this turned into a bit of a game. This became something where the companies would engage, would talk, would make commitments, but did it lead to real change? Did it lead to follow through? Often the pressure was lifted and the attention went with it. Companies were not changing enough. They were keeping the core of who they were and how they operated. And more recently, what we saw was people across the investment community walk away from their commitments on net zero, on human rights, and actually there was a backlash against this, something that has been called the ESG backlash, the environmental, social, and governance approach, which was really popular in the investor world a few years ago. It was a way of thinking about social and environmental issues. Well, there was a backlash against this, and people walked away. So this wasn't working. We weren't able to galvanize enough investors and sustain their focus. I was getting frustrated. I thought, who else can change companies? So I moved to government regulation. All right, we're now going to the real important thing here. Let's level the playing field. Every company has to do the right thing if we can regulate them to do this. Every company has to reduce their pollution. Every company has to respect human rights. Surely this will work. This will be a way to enforce a higher bar for everybody. So here I started working with a whole bunch of civil society organizations, trade unions, lobby groups that were wanting to achieve better environmental and social protection. I started working with progressive business lobby groups as well, who said, hey, we are trying to do the right thing, but the regulation is undercutting us. Is meaning that we are disadvantaged in the marketplace. And we started to see some success. This really galvanized, whether it's in Brussels, where I work with a bunch of different organizations to drive some of this, or in Southeast Asia, where we started seeing minimum wage laws and some human rights protections come in, for instance. We started seeing this really start to gain some traction. Right, level the playing field, make it fair for everybody. But what happened was that the mainstream business community fought back. They started lobbying against this. They're galvanized, and they threatened governments. They said, you want better jobs? You'll have no jobs. We'll move away from your country unless you drop these environmental standards, you drop these labor standards. That threat of capital flight really scared many of the world's governments. And over time, that led to watering down of regulations, watering down of policies. Now I was really frustrated. I thought, what's going to work? How are we going to drive change? The pressure from government, from investors, from consumers is not enough. The core of what companies are pushes back. The leadership of corporate CEOs is not enough. Companies are holding them back, clipping their wings. What could work? And through this, I landed on, well, we need alternatives. We need businesses that are not going to resist this change, that are going to lean into this. Businesses like social enterprises or fair trade enterprises, like worker cooperatives and employee-owned businesses. Businesses that put nature on their board, for instance, and have nature-based governance models. Businesses deploying innovative ideas like steward ownership, which, for instance, Patagonia or Einhorn or ShareTribe are using to make sure that their profits are being used for the positive purpose of the company. We started seeing innovation, and I started dedicating my career to fostering these alternatives that were designed to focus on social and ecological goals. I ended up leading the World Fair Trade Organization, where this was an amazing, inspiring community of fair trade enterprises. I joined the social enterprise movement and fostered that movement as much as I could. I started supporting employee ownership models in Spain, in the UK, and elsewhere. I started seeing these emergence of community-owned renewable energy. Yes, this was it. What you do is you build the alternative that makes the mainstream obsolete. But we hit a brick wall. And that brick wall was finance. We were not getting the investment needed for these models that would drive the success that is at the heart of this. And we were not getting the support of government, who saw this as a marginal activity. So I'm going to pause here because at this point, I didn't know what to do. And I started asking students of mine. I teach sustainability to mostly people from businesses, and I ask them this same question every year. To make businesses a force for good, what should we focus on? I'm going to ask each of you to raise your hand to the 5 things I listed very quickly, because I do this straw poll every year with my students. I'm going to do it in the room. Who thinks enlightened leadership? Raise your hand. Who thinks consumer pressure? Raise your hand. Who thinks investor pressure? Who thinks government regulation? And lastly, who thinks we need to build the alternatives? All right, it's a pretty even split across these. Let me show you what my students have been telling me for the last 6 years. When we started, it was all about consumer behavior. They saw that, look, consumers are going to be the solution. They're going to push it. But there was a decline, and there was a loss of faith with consumers actually following their talk. Next, enlightened leadership. But that declined over time as something that my students thought was critical. Government regulation. That really became higher and higher. People used to say, no, let's make it voluntary. And now most say we need regulation. Next is investor pressure. And there was a bit of a peak. And afterwards, it dropped back again. And the last, there is a growing awareness that we need a new form of enterprise. Businesses not designed for the 20th century model of optimizing for financial capital and optimizing to maximize that extraction, but businesses that are there to maximize social and ecological good. There is an actual awareness that is emerging around the world. And when I reflect on all of these insights, what I notice is that there are 2 main approaches that transcend everything. There are people working on the incremental, people trying to do things within the limits and the realities of the current system, the current design of business, the current design of finance, the current model of politics. They're trying to accept those norms and work within it. But often, they can entrench the very structures that are hurting our ability to achieve change. and they can often undermine the emergence of the new, the emergence of alternatives that are trying to rise but are being marginalized. And then there are those that are looking for transformative, deep-rooted change. And these are trying to be authentic and intellectually honest in saying this is what we actually need. We cannot have businesses that are trying to maximize for extraction. But at the same time, these can self-marginalize, can marginalize themselves and completely ignore the realities of finance and economics of today's world. What we need is for these two to have a conversation with each other, to realize they need each other, to realize we need incremental realists who are thinking about envisioning the alternative. And we need those practical visionaries that are trying to build the alternative that are rooted in the realities of today. The two can and must work together. But to do this, there are two personal and deep things I've noticed. One is that we need to come to terms with the cracks in our own approach. We become so used to selling our ideas confidently with clarity, but there are cracks and there is doubt. And we need to sit with that doubt. It's uncomfortable, but at the same time, it's necessary. And the second is that we need to become an orchestra. We cannot just play our own instrument in isolation. And you know what? It's going to sound messy. It's going to be out of tune, but eventually we'll get to harmony. To do this, the one practical thing that you can help do, whether you're writing a report or you're driving a new initiative, designing a new company, trying to create change in government or through investors, the one thing you can do is, how can I promote the new and the emergent today? How can I promote a different approach to what I'm honestly taking in my day-to-day work? And how can I sit with the complexity and the discomfort of the doubts and the cracks that are inherently there in my own approach? Once we do that, we can then truly work together. We can drive transformation in business. And I believe we will get to a better and thriving world. Thank you.